For those of you who don't know me, I'm John James. I've been involved in the climate debate for over 30 years. I formed a web page 8-9 years ago called Planet Extinction, which turns out to be a truer and truer title as we go on. And in various ways, this has been a very large part of my life. I read a lot, I go to a lot of conferences, and I really do my best to understand the actual science of the situation. I'd like it if we could have tonight the opportunity to talk as I go. So if there's something you want to raise while I'm talking, raise it. And at the end, I want to have an in-depth discussion around the elements that come out of this talk. It's really important we get the fact that this information up here, the speed at which things are accelerating, the lack of any real commitment to slow down global warming, and the ongoing ignorance of politicians and industrialists about what they are perpetrating. And this then comes down to us as consumers and what we are perpetrating as consumers. It's an endless theme. Now, when we look at what the prognosis has been, 2001, 2004, 2009, something's going to happen 100 years from now. Not going to be in our bailiwick. But once we go a little bit further and we look deeper into what the acceleration of CO2 and other pollutants is producing, that is what is making the difference. So we look a little bit further and we suddenly begin to see, even at Copenhagen, which was a roaring success, we're still talking about 4 to 7 degrees by the end of the century. This is the best science available. It's not just done by one attempt to assess the implications of everything, but many, many, and looking at the range of possibilities. Does anyone have any idea what 4 degrees means? Or 2 degrees? 2 degrees essentially means that we may, with luck, have 1 billion people on the planet. 2 degrees is disastrous. And yet here we can go to Copenhagen and say, okay, by the time my kids have grown up, we're going to deal with something very much bigger. And then we come to the more recent. Here we are, 2010, 2011. We're looking at 6 degrees. Now, these are estimates, understand that. They rely on a tremendous number of assumptions. But the fact that we can make an estimate of this nature and publish it and have it accepted as scientifically valid has to set us thinking much more deeply than we have been. 2035? I could still be alive in 2035. Most of you could be. And we look at 6 degrees. 6 degrees average global warming is untenable for human beings. This is based upon a rather interesting sort of analysis. It is that if we look at the existing structure, the infrastructure that we've got, power, railroads, oil, gas, cars, and we do nothing, that's our trajectory. And it hits the 6 degree inevitability by 2035. And these are alternatives how if we actually convince somebody not to elect Tony Abbott, not to elect anybody like that, if we could do that, we might perhaps be able to deal with the Reinhardts who are putting us into this position. So what I'm saying to you is we are locked in. There is a certain inevitability in all of this. We can say at this very moment, and I'm sorry about these lines, I don't know how they appeared, 2 degrees is inevitable. I don't know if any of you have read what 2 degrees means. It means that certain tipping points, do I need to explain a tipping point to this educated audience? No? Good. That certain tipping points will be hit. It means that the centre of Australia cannot be lived in. It means that most of the state of Victoria is in permanent drought and permanent fire. It means that cyclonic weather is coming down the east coast. You know, I can go on and on. 2 degrees is serious, and yet we're talking about 6. Now, the question then, of course, is why isn't it here right now? And the answer is what's called global dimming. The rubbish that we put into the sky is what actually shields us from the consequences of our actions. We could say, thank goodness we've thrown all of this filth into the air because we don't have to face the results of what we've done. It's a very interesting proposition to think that our rubbish has actually kept us 1.2 degrees cooler than we ought to be. Now, how does this actually happen? I love James Lovelock's words, we're in a fool's paradise, accidentally kept cool by smoke. But we can go beyond the humour. We can try and actually look at what this means. And this little graph shows, if I come back to 1998, through to a little bit further on than now, this is the increasing rate of emissions. And here we are at 420 parts per million, 520 and so on and so on. But to each of those, there is an increasing space here between what latency, global dimming, has given us as a gift. So at this point here, 2007, which I reckon was the critical year, when we had 380 parts per million of CO2, at that point we had an average temperature around the world of about, average temperature rise of about 0.8 degrees. But in fact, we should have been at that point at 2 degrees. If the factories stopped, if we stopped the outpouring, this is where we would be. And of course you go on with this, and then you go on further with that. And this is why we now think 6 degrees is a possibility. Let's not say probability. We may still be reasonably responsible at some point and do something about it.
Should we put a lot more smoke into the atmosphere?
Absolutely. But you think of the cost of that in more CO2. This is the paradox. Every single move we make to make something better involves increasing the problem. Everything you do to blanket the earth further, to put little particles up there, to change the water, to put in non-acidic elements into the water, all these different schemes put up involve a vast amount of industrial power. And that, of course, puts us back deeper into the hole. So the paradox is there is frankly nothing we can do but stop. So when you think about these things, how do we actually stand to handle our own lives? You know, there's no point in saying, is there, I'm going to withdraw and be miserable. I think the opposite. I think this is a time that's really fascinating, exciting, extremely enriching, unlike anything humanity has ever faced before. And we are able, actually, to find an extremely successful way to live. But my point to you is that we need to start doing this now, not some later time. I mean, you think about food and water, trade and money, security. What else is there? When you come down to the roots of it, What else is there but these things? Community? Absolutely. But these are the three elements that hold us together as human beings. I have clothes on my back, they're not going to be stolen from me, and I can have dinner at night. Family is a way of achieving that, but these are the root things.
Do we need to trade in money? Do we need to trade in money? Why would we need to trade in money?
Exactly. Exactly the point I'm gradually coming to. But let's just look at this thing of food for a moment. I live on a few acres, and I've been growing food now for some years, and trying to grow everything that we need in fruit and vegetables. We've been a great success, and at certain levels a failure. We had a year like last year when we had virtually no fruit. It was too wet. We had a year like this year when the animals, the little bugs, the little beetles, virtually took us over. This is the reality of farming. Now, how many of you grow any vegetables or fruit at all? Wow, lovely. How many of you could say that you could live for a month from what you grow? One. Let alone 12 months. Let alone storing it for the year. Let alone knowing that what I've got in the spring I can keep until the following spring. Let alone keeping our seeds so we can better them and use them again. You know, these are all the things that make farming. I'm not going to spend time talking to you about transitional towns and so on. This is for you to do. I'm just putting the picture so that you can walk away saying, yes, this is something I recognize I need to do and I will do. Practice now. Start this process right in the here and now. All of you are growing things? Right. Start growing things that are difficult. And just watch what happens. This is the key. We can all grow pumpkins. That's what you've got to learn. You've got to learn about the timing and the little bugs, and when the rain comes, and how to keep the birds out.
The bowbirds eat the leaves of the pumpkin.
Yeah. You see, so now we come into protection, security. Where's your shotgun? You know, we've got to think about this. We have to really...
Different shading conditions as well.
Exactly. All of these things. They're crucial. And you do not learn them in a year. You need time. And of course, trade and money, well, of course, this is always interesting. I mean, we might talk about how nice it would be if money disappeared, and these nice schoolboy tricks, but I doubt if that's a real issue. I think the issue is what happens to our ability to exchange. I mean, I can't grow avocados here. Somebody over there can. Some way we can exchange them. You know, so exchange, no matter what the conditions, is something that will need to continue. However, I just want to spend a couple of words on a process of collapse, because we need to have in mind that nowadays life is lovely for most of us. We live in a cool environment. We can buy, get, exchange most of the things we need. We are so fortunate. I'm a medieval historian, and I know how rare the conditions are that we have achieved today. And I also know, looking back on the past, how rapidly these can disappear. And your process of disappearance is pretty standardized. The first thing that goes is the ability to increase money, that is, to borrow money, to get something when you haven't got something, to have somebody trust you long enough and deeply enough to lend you something of his so that you can do something and pay him back. That's the first thing that goes. It's a banking issue today, but it is the first thing. Your second thing is trade, exchange, commerce. The vehicles of commerce, the Kmarts and the Coles's and so on, we probably might say to ourselves, I'd be very glad if they went. But if they did go, where do you get your stuff? So that's your next thing to go. There's no viable alternative. And of course with that you think about coal and oil and the transport of goods. And I'll come to that one in a moment. What goes next is the last shred of respect for politics and politicians. Politics disappears. What you have is naked power. Things happen because I have the gun and you don't. And at this point, society itself begins to unravel. And as that does, we can come to that horrible point where even the culture that sustains us, where we think we're Australians, we understand what we are and the way we relate to each other, that too can disintegrate. Because collapse can be an extremely big thing, and we need to have some understanding of the mechanism that produces. Now this is one of the most fascinating things. 1884 until 2006, I hope I can make it work. It has a habit of not liking working. But what you will see evolving, come on baby, come on, work for Johnny. No, too far, back. This thing should work.
Technology when it works.
Is it a quick time video?
It's embedded and it works when I'm at home. Okay.
Source file.
Pardon?
You go to the source file and play the source file.
I'm not going to do that. What it shows, in fact, is how these different colours move and change over all the years. How before the war, there was quite a considerable heating up in the north. The war came with heaps of global pollution everywhere, destroyed buildings, gunfire, fires, and the degree of warming reduced. And it stayed reduced for a while, and then it began to increase again until it became really serious and produced that map.
Those colours represent the amount of warming from the
Degrees of heat, yes.
degrees of warming.
So you can see some going in, some coming out, some becoming hotter, some becoming cooler. And you can see it over time. And it's a wonderfully, wonderfully exciting map when you see it. Now, notice what we've got here.
Bring some avocados. Can you see it at your place?
Won't be long to get the avocados. Now here, look at where the heat is. It's in the northern 20% of the hemisphere. It's been like this now for years. This is why the Antarctic is disappearing. Because this should be cold water, and it's not. Hmm? Yeah, the Arctic's up in here, of course, but it should be cold. But the amount of heat is actually increasing the level of warmth in the currents of the water, and that hotter water, is moving down through here and beginning to melt this area, which of course leaves Iceland literally isolated. Greenland's your real problem. We can talk about the Antarctic as well, but for Greenland we need to understand that the Greenland ice sheet is now under complete danger. The modelling and a lot of work's been done on Greenland. It's accessible, you can get onto it with nice summer skies for much of the year. You can drill deep holes and discover what's happening in the ice. Greenland, the beauty of Greenland is that it's the experimental model for what's happening both in the northern hemisphere and in the south. And what it's showing is that at roughly 2.2 degrees increase average temperature, the ice mass of Greenland begins to collapse. It's already melting like mad. You see drawings, photographs of ice pouring down into great chasms and water flowing out at the bottom. But it's at 2.2 degrees. So I'm going to follow this for a little bit because it has huge consequences.
Can you just confirm, is that ice water, non-salty water?
In Greenland?
Greenland?
Yes. It's not salty, which has implications for the Gulf Stream, of course.
And where it's white and blue, or blue, that's actually areas where it's getting cooler?
It's on the cooler side of the spectrum.
Oh, but it's getting hot less rapidly, is that
Yeah.
what it means?
That's a pretty good statement.
Yeah.
It's helped, of course, by the Gulf Stream and all these other things that are happening. And I wish I could have shown you that other thing. However, you can see what's happening with Greenland. This is the melt area, and that was in 2011. Today, it's almost totally a melt area. Not by a great deal, but the surface is being disintegrated. And we're moving towards that tipping point of collapse. And Greenland has enough water in its ice to raise sea levels by 8 meters. Now, I mean, compared to the Opera House, it may not seem much. But 1 meter, just 1 meter. Now, let's just see. Firstly, let's just look at the maths of this thing. 2.2 is the one that we're looking at. And it's heating more than the global average. And since the global average increase is 0.03 degrees per year, Greenland is roughly 0.1. These are pretty crude John James style mathematics, but it serves to explain what's going on. Because if we take our current temperature increase and we add to that this for 14 years, we get to our 2.2. It actually suggests a level of collapse in Queensland, in Greenland within our own time. And that's not far away. And I can look at this in another way. If, for example, we take the famous polar bear photograph, this is the trend of disintegration in Greenland. And you'll notice that just over the past few years, this line has changed. We've had a change in a qualitative change, not just a quantitative, not just a regular change, but some incremental. And if we like to continue that a little bit longer and see what happens over down to here, it still runs in much the same sort of way. It hasn't become disastrous. But when we come to that 14-year period, this is what graphically might happen. It's happened in the past. The evidence is that Greenland, in fact, collapsed in the past over a 10-year period. And we're looking back 600,000, 700,000, a million years ago, previous ice ages and major changes. Greenland has a habit of falling apart very rapidly when that happens. I mean that the structure that you can keep on melting comes to a point where there's nothing cohesive left in the ice to hold it together. And the ice can begin to fall apart, literally, just collapse and tumble. And that within a very short time, it'll end up as meltwater, icebergs in the water.
John, also, is it true that the ice caps form like they're buffers for absorbing extremes of temperature? Is that true? So when they go, then there's more extremes of temperature? Is that how the science works?
I'm not sure about that. It sounds reasonable, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, it reflects back a lot of the radiation because it's, you know, a white surface just reflects it all
Yes,
back.
it does. And once we remove that, which we're removing now, of course, in the Arctic sea ice, then, of course, things get much hotter very quickly. Is that what you were meaning? Yeah.
There's also another thing. John I heard about in Bolivia, the climate change conference, is that it's not only warming, but it's also the pollution. And because of the pollution, the ice is actually dark. Before, it was reflecting light,
Yes.
so it didn't melt. But
Yeah.
now it's dark, so it melts much quicker, even without such a big increase in temperature.
So we're saying the dimming effect, the rubbish we throw into the air, is speeding it up as far as the ice is concerned.
The
Yeah.
temperature might be not going up much higher, but the melting.
The melting is, yes, and that indeed is what may well be happening here.
When did you say the last big collapse of Greenland was?
I can't give you precise dates, but if you go on the web and you look at what are the Holocene and the other great climatic shifts in the past, what you'll find is that the CO2 increases quite rapidly and then stops, but the methane comes up behind that with a sudden surge, and that's the thing that triggers everything off, and that's when the big melts tend to happen.
So when did they call it Greenland? It must have been green.
It was,
Yeah.
around the perimeter, not all of it,
Ah.
but there was a green strip around there. The Danes inhabited it, lived there for quite a long time. During the medieval warm period of the 11th, 12th, 13th centuries, the Danes lived there, and I think the last Dane pulled out in about 1320, just got too cold. Now, let's just explore the implications of this. 'Cause my feeling is that sea level rise is going to be the most significant factor. And if we can understand that, then a lot of other things fall into place. 2 million from Australia. So we've got our own refugees at this point. Don't worry about the Bangladeshis, the Indians, the Filipinos, who have by this time lost most of their most productive arable land. Most of Shanghai and the surrounding land is underwater at this level. So you ask, where do they go? What country do they move into? Who wants them or doesn't want them? Who will let them move in? Who will object to their movement? Who will safeguard the border? And under what terms? So 2 million from Australia is an astounding number of people. We have what in Sydney? 4 million? So you take a bundle of them, 500,000 at least, if not more. Where are they going? Up here?
Of course.
Where else will they go? Exactly. You know, this is a reality. And what brings out the reality is a very interesting study done by the Commonwealth Government on what 1 metre would do around the Australian coast. 200,000 homes. Or by the sea. I mean, we all know the story, don't we, of Gosford? You know that story? Oh, let me tell the story of Gosford. Gosford's interesting. The state government said you must put in your LEPs a ruling on any block of land that is subject to sea surge, that it is subject to potential flooding. So Gosford went ahead and did it. Their whole coastline, all those wonderful inlets that go all the way around Gosford. It must have affected 20% of their properties. The property owners found their values were going down. So they banded together and went to Gosford Council and bullied them with a bunch of legal experts. And Gosford Council agreed, like King Canute, that the seas will not rise. So they withdrew these obnoxious rulings on the LEPs. But what it means is when the seas do rise, who's responsible?
The council.
The council. Which means we, as ratepayers, not up here of course, but down there, the ratepayers have to pay. Makes you think a bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, the other reason they did that in Gosford come from up there is because they couldn't get insurance.
That was the other reason. Yes, well.
Their insurance was void. They had clause in their insurance where it was not covered, wouldn't cover any water damage or anything else.
But I think those covers are probably still there, because you can see what the insurance industry is doing with alacrity is, I mean, how many of you have insurance policies that went up significantly in the last 12 months? Besides me.
Can I just say that, yeah, the Insurance Council of Australia and the insurance industry in general have been on top of this for a very long time, because to them it means dollars.
Yes.
So they've actually, from my understanding, they've actually done a lot of work in forecasting, and that's why things like OSPA come along. They've gone, yeah, right, we're not going to give you any, we're not going to insure you because these things are real.
Exactly.
And even if they're not real, they have to weight it. And so that's why you're beginning to see these things. So actually the Insurance Council, the insurance guys are actually forward thinking into 40, 50 years in the future, because that's where they work out their money from.
They understand this,
They've said, let's take it as real and work with it.
and you're right about this, they understand this better than the politicians.
They do.
And their figures are really fascinating. In fact, I'll show you one in a moment. But you just look here. There's 120 ports that get affected. Industrial zones, police, firefighters, ambulances. You know, all the people who come to our rescue the moment there's a problem are not going to be there because they're going to be flooded out. It's really important to see that 1 metre is not just a metre. A metre means the dissolution of a carefully nurtured, tended and worked out infrastructure which preserves our way of life. So we are talking collapse, even at 1 metre, let alone 4 or 8. I mean, think of the cost of it.
Can I just say that maintenance will probably lead to that falling over before the 1 metre's reached?
What will?
Maintenance, ongoing maintenance costs. Because
I can believe that too.
you'll get little floods coming along, and road seals are only designed to deal with a certain amount, and so you're already seeing it now with councils having to forecast into their maintenance budgets into the future, and the burden on that, and so things get prioritised,
Mm-hmm.
and so what will get prioritised over other things.
That's it.
Yeah, it all kicks in.
So seawalls, no value at all. They'll be overwhelmed. Your simplest thing is to pick up and come to the mountains. Oh, do we want them?
In 2007, when a lot of this information was exacerbated, like at the peak, all the car companies started all their normal cars dropped down, all their ATVs and four-wheel drive vehicles went through the roof.
Okay.
The car industry at the time, you couldn't get normal. Everything was an ATV. It was like
Mm-hmm.
it's like everything came in four-wheel drive. Every model that never used to come
Yes.
in four-wheel drive came in four-wheel drive.
But,
model.
but people didn't do that with houses, did they? They left their houses on concrete slabs on the ground. So, the next issue, of course, comes when you start talking about Greenland collapse, is cyclonic weather, catastrophic fires, and of course, your point about insurance is very accurate, because you can see how the number of natural catastrophes has been following a steepening curve. And this is where insurance and the REXs and all the others, that's where they come in. So, and this I find the most interesting to think of. Nearly everything we make comes from China. Nearly everything we use. If I don't have wharves, and Shanghai doesn't have wharves, how do we get it in? Wharves. So we start to get all these things impacting on each other. They're not just saying, I can solve this one problem, now we'll go and put a plug in that one and we'll put Tom Thumb's finger in this hole. It's not like that. It's the entire interlocked complexity of a modern society that becomes under threat. And this is the big thing to think about. The moment you start to reduce manufacture, you reduce global dimming. And most of that stuff we've thrown into the sky would have fallen out of it within 2 years. So you start to have a very rapid increase in temperature. And of course, more ice, more collapse, higher sea levels. And of course, quite apart from the forests dying and the plankton dying and the fish being too acidic, we have this huge problem of 8 billion people by then. 8 billion.
How acidic are the seas going to become?
We're at the point now where the large predator fish have been reduced to about 80% of what they were 40 years ago. It doesn't take very much more to eliminate a lot of them. They won't be the fish as we know them. There's no place for them in a highly acidic ocean. And somebody says, well, let's just fill the whole thing with whatever it is that turns something from acid to alkaline. Fill it with lime. Good. Where do we get this from? What's the energy required to do it? I think we need to sit back and recognize that we are in for the running. And we must find, while we're doing that, a way of handling it so that we don't hurt ourselves, but can live as well as we possibly can. And you think about it. We always talk about how can we live well, sustainably, durably seems to be the new word for it, with local materials, local product, local security. Okay, this is vital. We need to be able to develop our community. And community doesn't mean me being here and somebody being in Hartley Vale and somebody else down at Penrith. That's too big. Because what's happened to oil? What's happened to motor cars and ways of travelling? Community is small. North Katoomba is a potential community. Hartley Vale, where I live, is a potential community. But we need to start developing these practically, creating our own food supply as we need it and making it work. I gave this talk in Richmond, and one woman stood up and said, I have a job where I can actually leave my job for 1 day a week, forego that money. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to start growing my own food. That was inspiring.
We have to be prepared to share it too, though, because we live in a region where it's notoriously difficult to grow food, the Blue Mountains. And I think we have to link up with other regions that are similar to find out how they grow food too. Because I think that, I think that the sharing of the food is essential to this.
Absolutely essential. We don't grow wheat up here. We don't grow rice. These are basics. We can live on vegetables, but we do need some of that other food. Beef growing is not particularly good up here. Chooks are fine.
Lots of kangaroos.
Lots of kangaroos, and that's another option. But we need to start investigating all of these now while we have the chance and while we in fact have the power of communication. It's tremendously important. And part of it means letting go in our mind of our concept of how life is meant to be. The concepts we run by are money-making, capitalist, consumerist concepts, and none of them are going to apply in the future. So it means a mind shift, a state of life comprehension that is going to be different to anything we understand. We can say, yes, I can grow food, and I can go and talk to him about it, and he can do this, and so on and so on. But it's not that anymore. I can't fill in my spare time when I'm feeling miserable by going shopping. That option disappears. What do I do? How do I solve my problem? You can say that. You can say, yes, yes, yes. But it's absolutely terminal for some people if they can't have some outlet for their attention. We've got to ponder this one. How many people are we going to have in the world in 15, 20 years' time? We might only have 1 billion. This raises the most enormous issue that really doesn't come to the fore at all. but it is grief. When somebody dies, they're not an island. John Donne said us all that. We are part of the whole. So some people may die in the Sudan and we can sit in front of our television and not worry. But when there's no television and when people are dying around us and we know about huge deaths in other places, our hearts are involved. There is a way in which we need to foretaste that, ponder its meaning. I'm not going to have, neither are any of us, 500,000 people living in Bali or other places that we know because we're great travellers, knocking on the Australian door and saying, we've been flooded out, move over. What are we going to do? We need to think that one through too. These are really hard choices. But they're the sort of choices that are exciting. They're ones which force us to think differently, to come out of the rut. They're extraordinary that we are in a generation that has, I'm putting it this way, has an opportunity to restructure our mental structures to this degree.
John, are you talking to us as a mountain community in growing food and all that? How do people live in apartments all over big cities? How are they going to grow their food? If they live in a one-bedroom apartment or two-bedroom apartment, what is the solution for them? What would you advise?
I'd find my neighbour who has some garden and not enough energy, and you help them grow food. It's back to community.
There's a lot of gardens in
There's
Bondi.
heaps.
In Bondi, for example, a friend of mine, she grows a lot of food on the balcony. It's small
Yes.
balcony. It's just full. You can grow gardens up. So best ways to jog.
Gardens could be.
No, on the balcony or on the walls. Vertical gardens. There's also a lot of strips between buildings. People grow there.
I
There's-
think you get many people who actually have the time, the skill, and
That's
will-
what
will
it
think.
is.
This is what I'm
That's why
saying. This is my point. We have time now to learn these skills. We actually have time to gather the information and the knowledge.
And whenever you go to the job, you know, you have 7 days a week.
And this is really this is the key of what I'm saying. We don't ever give up. Somebody gave me a hanging from the Dalai Lama, and basically this is what he was saying. No matter what happens, you never give up because life is about living. This is the passion about life. And okay, there's problems, but I think to do it we need to do certain things. So letting go of the notion that Homo sapiens will inhabit this planet beyond 2030. We may, but let go of the notion that is in fact limiting us. Come back to the notion, I'm here now, today, this is my reality, this is all there is. What happens in 2030, that is for the future. It's a very important learning because it's very possible that we may not be here in 2030. If we go up to 6 degrees by 35, we'll be gone long before that.
Sorry, John, have you actually thought, like, when, you know, the ice caps melt and the glaciers melt and the earth crust, all that weight's off it, and the tectonic plate movement and all the volcanoes and stuff that can then be activated?
Yeah, you can.
Because of that?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
But I thought I'd keep this talk rather simple. You take the ice off Iceland, what happens to it? It shoulders its way back up again. And then Iceland, of course, and all those cracks running down the Atlantic, they all have a ball.
Yeah, it
Yes.
affects everything all around.
I mean, it's already happening.
Some chasms could open up and actually the sea level could drop that as well.
Easy. It's happened
Actually,
before.
the other way, enough
That will
volcanic
reduce
activity.
the population, won't it? Very quickly.
That will reduce the population.
It will. Many things will. That may be one, but I wasn't going to go there. It's a bit. I'm trying not to be too speculative, right? Let go of this notion too, that there will still be any comfortable habitat for humans anywhere. Just think what that means. I may be wrong in this again, but if we let go of the notion we are free to seek the solutions that we need, whatever they are. It's that freedom it gives us in our mind, not to be terrorized by what we think may happen, but to see it as the opportunity for being creative and loving and community-minded and doing things together. And that's a very big one. But we're losing literally hundreds of species a day. And we're going to be one of them, probably. We need to be not stuck on these notions. We need, in fact, to think, if I'm going to join any activist group to do any particular thing, I must bear in mind certain things are strictly a waste of time. I'm not making these choices or suggesting any choices, but we need to begin to be very serious about how we move ourselves in the future that's moving our way, because there is an inevitability about much of it. And this to me is absolutely fundamental. I'm here because this is what I believe. Resistance is what makes us human. Standing up for what we believe, standing up and stating how we believe it is what gives life its tone, its pressure, its excitement and passion. And there's no point in saying, well, we're all going off within 20 years, I'm going to live 20 years being miserable. No point in doing that whatsoever.
Can I take issue with your use of the word, this is how I believe it is? Shouldn't it be a little bit more, this is what my understanding of the systems and the change?
Yeah, I'll accept that. Yeah.
This is not a belief.
It's not a matter of belief. No. The understanding is so now, sadly, unequivocal. And I love this. We are the most creative creatures on the planet. We have this extraordinary, wonderful capacity to create out of nothing, out of an idea which has no substance at all, the most amazing relationships and things and concepts. We're magic as species. Let's use it. Let's use it in the right, fullest, most exciting way. Because life is to be lived. Is to be lived totally.
I think we also need to accept that with every great advance, we've sown the seeds of our next problem. Which I learned in the management class.
Well, I was a Marxist for a long time. And one of his lovely statements was, every successful society sows the seeds of its own destruction. So we're quite true about that. But I end up on this, no? Whatever we do, don't give up. Life is what we make of it, no matter what the conditions. The most wonderful stories we've read of people really in the most terrible circumstances, like in concentration camps, the people who really we admire are the people who have not given up, but have made life live in whatever the circumstances are. So we're not there. We're here in this incredibly lucky society where whatever we really want is given to us one way or another, or gettable one way or another. And we will have that for a bit longer. Let's use it. Thank you.
Wow. Very, very nice.
Hmm?